start the ball rolling, first of all, we want to thank those of you who will be coming to Branson. And fortunately, but also unfortunately, it's sold out. We do have a waiting list. We're limited by the powers that be and the owners of the mansion that we cannot go beyond what they have seats for and what the fire marshal will let them. But we are offering live streaming, Doug. And I think this will be one of the most unusual conferences in conference history, not because of who's there, but because of the timing of the events unfolding. You know, we're seeing so many ancient themes coming back into the contemporary headlines. If you look at Drudge, I think they had 5 or 6 of them, new dinosaurs, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's everything that we've talked about. And so what's interesting is that, you know, when people all over the world, they obviously can't come to Branson. There's no seats available, but they can learn, I think. And so what our goal is at Branson is to give them an understanding of history from start to finish. And it's like Derek's book, The Great Inception. It's Satan's psyops from Eden to Armageddon. And most people don't understand the connection. The idea is simply this, that truly there's nothing new under the sun. And when it was so effective the first time for Satan to promise Adam and Eve that if they just would eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they would become like God. Right now, everybody in the billionaire world and in the prolonging life forever mode is basically talking about there's nothing that will be kept from them. So we have what I call technological Babylon. That's one of my words I coined a number of years ago. That's taking place. And just as God came down to scramble the languages, there's going to be an event. I don't know what, but I think that we can take our cue from the past. There will be an event. It's going to scramble everything up. It's interesting because, as you know, Derek, they were talking about AI developing a language that they could not interpret, so the machines started talking to themselves. And it's my contention that as AIs and robotics and sex bots and everything else become more and more, how should I say this, human-like by the efforts to replace humans, that we're in the period of the Terminators. We are in the period of, beyond Arnold Schwarzenegger coming from the future to do whatever he's going to do. And so I want to turn that over to you, Derek, because, again, from Eden to Armageddon, I asked Derek, too, before we went on the show tonight, earlier this morning, I said, Derek, I want you to share just, go where you want to go. Now, Derek's going to be, officially presenting a lot of stuff at Inception, from his book, The Great Inception, at Branson. And so, you can come and hear him, or you can order the online streaming, which will absolutely, I promise you, be mind-changing. It'll be revolutionary, and your lives, because of, I believe, the anointing that's going to be there, you'll be hearing Henry Groover and also David Langford from 9 to 12 on Sunday morning, which we're going to live stream, Doug. I think it's going to be a powerful, powerful thing. And I think God is literally, I'm going to call this a Queen Esther moment for such a time like this, because as the days grow darker, people need to understand the power that's available to them for the living God that the pulpits, and you and I call them the pulpiteers, have robbed from the people. So, Derek, aren't you surprised, and probably not surprised, but aren't you, I don't know what word to use, amazed maybe at how many headlines now are breaking forth about the ancient this, ancient that thought? I think the thing that really is critical is for people to understand, it is my contention, and obviously the parallel thought, is that there's nothing new under the sun, but that advanced technology has been known as far into the prehistoric past of the fallen angels, their technology, etc. That's how far advanced the occultists have taken true science, whether it's combining human-animal DNA. I almost called them humanimals, but we're now seeing some things that were even laid out, and it's interesting that Francis Bacon, I know Tim Alvarino has talked on this show about it, but I want to go through this because it's critical to what we're going to talk about. Now, at Branson, I'm going to be talking kind of in 3 different 30-minute segments of the pre-Adamic period, and I call that the kingdom of angels, and I also call that the the civilization that God judged in Jeremiah chapter 4 on the flood there. There's some people that want to argue, but the two words, tohu and bohu, without form and void, are used 3 times in the scripture, and always judgment. And I think it's important that if people are interested in this, there's probably one of the greatest scholars, he's gone to be with the Lord now, Arthur Custance. You can go to custance.org, TANCE.org. Now, it's fascinating to me because a lot of people don't recognize that America, to many, is considered Atlantis, including Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon was basically the guy that a lot of people believe was Shakespeare. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we're talking about the early 17th century. Now, here's what he talked about. Deep underground facilities 3 miles down. I mean, think about this. And we're talking about, 1600s and into the late 1680s. Skyscrapers 1/2 mile high. That's a pretty remarkable statement. Wind and water turbines, artificial atmospheric devices, electrical devices, genetic labs, industrial manufacturing, lasers, powerful telescopes, spectacles for the eyes, magnifying glasses, audio amplification, including headphones, advanced firearms and missiles, flying machines, submarines, and holographic projections. Now, it's important that people understand that there's been a group, and I've been told that the true name for it is the Egyptian priesthood, even though we're going to talk tonight about stuff that goes back into the Sumerian period of time, all of the Sumerian gods. But what's fascinating is simply this. There have been keepers of the ancient secrets and traditions that have been passed on. Remember, knowledge is power. And to these, I will call them this, these assignees of the forbidden knowledge and the forbidden technology, they have always had, if you will, the passing down from their generations to generations. In other words, an all-secrets club of those who are preparing the earth for the return physically of Satan on earth, and the time where he will try and rule and reign for 42 months. Now, what's interesting is that there's no way that Francis Bacon could have known this on his own without having a record of it. And if that's true, then you can go to Tenochtitlan in Mexico City, and some of the original designs there are very similar to what obviously Plato wrote about Atlantis. And what is also important is Solon, the Plato's, if you will, mentor, was told by the Egyptian priest of Sais, S-A-I-S, that you Greeks are but children. There have been many cataclysms and will be many more. So it's fascinating that when you take everything into consideration, that we're going to be presenting all the different presenters and authors at Branson, the central theme is fascinating because basically it goes back to the times that we know. It's Derek putting pieces of the puzzle together. It's all of the different speakers. Obviously, the extraordinary work of Tom Horn, Dr. Michael Lake. And what's curious is that so much of it takes place in South America. Obviously, L.A. Marzulli will be speaking. We've got the foremost speaker in the world coming in on this, and I call him the most interesting man in the world, and his name is Anselm P. Rambla. And so when you start seeing the secrets and the mysteries of the Andes unfolding, and all of these events globally, worldwide coming to pass, new announcements every day about whether it's a cannibalism in finding bones with teeth marks, and there's all kinds of genetic tests you can do to identify that, the denial of cannibalism, yet the headlines fills the newspapers, magazines, movie theaters, imaginations, and video games. I think it's 14 or 15 video games that now have cannibalism as one of the central themes. For the record, the giants that fled the Holy Land and fled Joshua's command from the Lord. They went all over the world. And it may be interesting, everyone, to know that even John Wesley Powell, who was a curator of the Smithsonian and started covering up stuff, even he was investigating the pyramids along the Mississippi, Ohio River. And then the other thing that's interesting, in Wisconsin. So you can actually go on and do a search for Wisconsin pyramids. And those of you that might be connected or have good night, LexisNexis at your command, there's so much stuff on LexisNexis that about this that has been sanitized from the mainstream internet searches that it is mind-blowing. Literally, you can get lost in this stuff. I'm also going to be talking about something that's fascinating is this. There are multiple external resources and dissertations from different people around the world how literally the Egyptians covered the entire world with their seafaring skills. Now remember, you always think of just Thor Heyerdahl, if anybody's familiar with that, and Kon-Tiki, but it's way beyond that. Some of the Chinese, if you will, 2000 BC ships were 110, just about 410 feet, over 100 meters. And Maui, and this is fascinating, the island that Maui is named for was an Egyptian god. All of the totem poles and all of the different, if you will, idols that all these seafarers carried all go back to Egypt. And then in the book that Tom Horn and I wrote together, Cloud Eaters, and again, the Cloud Eaters book, the Cloud Eaters was simply talking about the giants. As you looked up at them, they were so tall that it looked like their heads were in the clouds. Now, no, I can't say it. I was going to say, if you look at modern society, you'd think their heads are someplace else, but I won't say that, okay? In other words, I can't say that. But the point is that the idea that the Egyptians were in the Grand Canyon, it's a matter of mockery to some, but the point is there's guys who are even the Native Americans that trace their lineage to that. And it's not because somebody came over from Egypt, married a Native American wife and produced that. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about in the ancient times. So the idea is that very, very clearly that the caves throughout the United States, the Americas, all of the underground tunnels, all of the different repositories for information artifacts, those things are a matter of record, there was a time when the gold artifacts from Kincaid's Tunnel were on display in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. It's fascinating because one of the artifacts was King Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti. So the astonishing thing is that there was a global draw to the Americas. Now remember, America was known as Amaruca to the natives, and that's the land of the plumed serpents. So if Atlantis was destroyed, and if the Americas are part of it, or if there are places in America, it still is interesting that to the South American, the Native Americans, they knew this land as the land of the plumed serpent. Then you get into the understanding of who the plumed serpent was. You get into Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Kukulkan. In essence, it goes to the white giants that came from the east. I think Tim Alberino found probably one of the most remarkable things that's been found in contemporary society as it relates to the Old Testament, where they found literally how do I put this nicely, the complaining area that was written in not so nice language about Joshua. They were fleeing. The giants were fleeing Joshua, the usurper. And so throughout America, you've got Canaanites, you've got basically a written language called Ogham, you've got the massive investigation and the ensuing understanding by Barry Fell, who wrote Bronze Age America, Saga America, and America BC, Harvard trained. You've got too many things stacking linking up. You've got too many things lining up. So remember this. If you've controlled the narrative for thousands of years, there's a reason you didn't want the truth out. And that, by the way, that's true so many times in pulpits. I can't tell you, people from all over the world say that when they ask, for instance, Derek, their pastor to look into this, it's almost like they think, they feel like they're vampires because the pastors, some of them just literally freak out and say, we won't go there, we won't go there. It's because the believers, and by the way, God's got nothing to hide of the truth. If, the point being is that all of the believers, if they had understood, if they could have dealt with the root of sin, they wouldn't have reaped the fruit of sin. In other words, it is the beginning of a thing, and that's why Jesus cursed the mustard tree, if you will, and said, not the mustard tree. He cursed, and I apologize, everybody. I've been fighting a headache all day. The tree, what was it, Derek? Was it the olive?
The fig tree.
And said, no man eat fruit from the. I'm sorry,
it was
a
fig tree. Yeah.
Yeah, fig tree. Okay. The idea, thank you so much. And if I'm a little looking for words, I thank those of you who intercede for me on a daily basis. I had to call Romy. I had to call David Langford because that's how bad a headache was. So, again, I'm normally not this struggling for words. So in the bottom line, and I've used that word too many times, the idea is simply this. America's history has been covered up to control it, just as the Middle East, just as the Egyptians. And when you've got an Egyptian, basically the president under the king and under the Egyptian parliament or their equivalent in the late 1880s, writing to the U.S. government, wanting all of their Egyptian artifacts back from all of their expeditions, and then saying if you can't return them, destroy them. Even in that time period and when I say the Egyptian Brotherhood, I mean the Egyptian priesthood, that which most people don't even know exists. And interestingly enough, the best portrayal of that whole Egyptian priesthood was, I think, in either the first or second Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr. When I saw that, I said, here you go, you guys. It's Hollywood, and I think I said that years ago when it came out. So it's very important that people understand the thread of history leads right to the very pages of our newspapers, the movies of our day, the headlines of the internet sites, and now we're in a time where there's nothing that's going to be hidden. How much time do we have, Doug?
We got another 30 minutes before the network break.
Oh, okay. So we're not taking breaks. So, Derek, I'll turn it back over to you because I think it's important that people understand all these things are linked and synced by a central theme, if you will, of snake worship. And I'm not just talking in the desert Southwest. I'm talking worldwide, or dragon worship, or the sea creatures. Go ahead, sir. That's really critical to understanding because a lot of people, who have been to the Grand Canyon, the real names for all of the, if you will, pyramidal or almost structures that look like the Sphinx were Hopi terms. They were not anglicized or Egyptianized terms that the National Park Service used. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is critical, everyone. When everybody talks about the Great Smithsonian cover-up, I want to give you this. This is an exact quote. Prime Minister Nubar Pasha of Egypt was the first Prime Minister of Egypt and served his first term from January 1884 to June 1888. Prime Minister Pasha of Egypt contacted the U.S. Department of State and requested that all of the Egyptian artifacts found in the Grand Canyon be returned to Egypt. Now, here it is, Derek. Here it is, Doug and Joe. He also requested that no more information about Egyptians ever being in the Grand Canyon be published by the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian archaeologists think that, and they, by the way, there's an unfinished Egyptian pyramid in the Grand Canyon. It looks like the Saqqara pyramid, or as a step pyramid, is a burial tomb because there's an entrance tunnel that is blocked a few feet inside the pyramid. But listen to this. The National Park Service will not allow the archaeologists to excavate any of the pyramids in the Grand Canyon. Now, Derek, I'm sure you get it, I get it. How does this relate to salvation? God is going to lead his people out of the area that's going to be destroyed. I don't know where that is, cities of refuge. But the Pharaoh was a type of the Antichrist that is yet to come. And interestingly enough, the final element when the children of Israel left was, obviously the idea that there is great judgment on Pharaoh, the Red Sea. Now, Derek mentioned a word, catastrophism, and I'm going to be dealing with that at Branson. What if the true biblical narrative, and by the way, the book of Job has a lot to say, as well as other Old Testament books, about God's catastrophic judgment upon a planet called Rahab. And Rahab was between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. And due to some laws in physics, they can calculate not only the size, but again, the amount, if you will, of gravitational pull that would have been necessary along with the plasma arc. And it goes to basically this: a planet of greater mass and greater electrical charge will destroy the planet of lesser mass and lesser electrical charge. The ancients were terrified of the skies. What I've found through all the years that I've been doing this is all the observatories, every place in the world, all of the astronomers who had the ancient knowledge passed down to them, Tom Horn's trip to Mount Graham, everybody is looking for the skies. They're looking for the, if you will, the testimony of past judgment, but the future judgment coming upon the earth, whether it's Apophis or whether it's other heavenly bodies. Here's the thing, Dirk. We talk about the planets, and everybody will deal or concern themselves with, Planet X, Gabriel's fist, Lucifer's hammer, the 10th planet, all these different names, but they avoid probably the greatest fingerprint of a catastrophic judgment on Lucifer. And you go into Ezekiel, the stones of fire, Hebrew idiom for planets, the idea that each star was the abode of an angel, falling stars or what shooting stars. The purpose of all this stuff, of ancient history, of putting this into perspective, is to show you the deception that's coming. And by the way, when you go into the Grand Canyon, I just flew over it months ago, and hopefully if I have time, I'll be presenting that at Branson too. But you've got the names of some pretty famous landmarks. And remember, these were told to the first park rangers and the explorers. The Tower of Set, it's Setabrine, and it was named by the Hopi Indians. The Tower of Set was built in the Grand Canyon as a burial tomb for King Setabrine that came to the Grand Canyon, but King Setabrine died on a trip back to Shemau. All the Egyptian hieroglyphs that have eroded off the pyramid. The Set pyramid has rectangular shape, similar to the first pyramids in Egypt. Then you've got the Hopi Indians talking about the most pyramidal structure that actually, I believe, was a sphinx before erosion and intentional destruction took place, is the Tower of Ra. And what's fascinating about the Tower of Ra is that you can actually see an entrance that when you look into the entrance with a high-powered lens, a telephoto, like a Canon 300, 400, extremely high-resolution lens with the sun in the right correct position, it looks like somebody actually, Derek, went in there and blocked it up and painted it white. But you can see footpaths. And what a lot of people don't understand is, like, with aerial imagery and satellite, the ability to take, and I'm not just talking about LIDAR, I'm talking about infrared and ultraviolet. You can actually see old, if you will, paths, footpaths, or horse paths. And this is how so many of the lost cities in Africa and other places have been found. But when you line all these things up, as so many people have done it, Graham Hancock and others, that every single one of the pyramids or the supposed natural structures line up either with Orion's belt or the Pleiades. And it's true not only in Egypt, it's true in the desert Southwest, it's true in Sardinia, it's true all over in Mexico. So by basically doing a regressive stellar projection, you can get the idea when these monuments and Cyclopean architecture, going even back further than 2000 BC, were installed. So even the story that people laugh about, that Mark Antony and Cleopatra, I'll be presenting that in pretty graphic form.
I have literally interviewed, Doug, and I've said this before, guys who are on the military mission of the takeout of other giant, G-I-A-N-T, mummies from the Grand Canyon. And the thing is, they were there on multiple occasions, and Cliff Mahooty, who we have on the DVD, Holocaust of Giants. And by the way, let me put a pitch in for this. If you want to be brought up to speed and what's going to be happening in the future with the headlines of tomorrow, I would encourage you to get the Unholy Sea, Gen 6 Productions, and you can go to TrueLegendsTheSeries.com, and more importantly, or in conjunction, the Holocaust of Giants. Because what we're going to show you unequivocally, and I know Tom's going to be talking about this isn't by coincidence. So if you're talking about the Tower of Set, you're talking about all the different, and they even have one called the Tower of Zoroaster. And Zoroaster is a guy that was, a lot of people believe that his name was Joseph, had been from Joseph, because he had a god that was higher in the heavens than the sun god named Ra, and that he knew what the dream meant. So there's a lot of syncretism, but what's astonishing to me, and I think if I had to tell you, and this, by the way, this the passage about Pasha and everything is in my book. Tom wrote the second half of the book. I wrote the first half of the book.
It's really important that people understand that it's an Orwell statement, George Orwell, who was pretty well connected to the inner crew, that they who control the past basically write the future, control the future. I believe what God is doing is showing his people, just like he delivered Moses and the children of Israel out of Egypt, when all of Pharaoh's army, so will he deliver the people that are obedient and praying and trusting him. It was when the money failed that obviously people just had to go. They had to flee Egypt because there was nothing left now except God's provision. God fed them with the manna, and I love this because it's true. When God feeds you, he knows what's nutritionally sound. I'm convinced, Derek, that God knew the nutritional supplemental value of manna. I am convinced that in one wonderful heavenly angel food wafer, you didn't need 400 bottles of every amino acid vitamin. I'm not mocking it, but I would just say this. With manna's inherent creator would come the nutrition that would be beyond description. Now, getting to quail, i.e., obviously, when the children of Israel were unhappy with the manna, they wanted meat, and God sent them the meat. But unfortunately, people couldn't stomach the meat, and they started to vomit. It's kind of like the truth. People cannot handle the truth. Too much is forgive me, sometimes too little is too much for them to digest. I also want to say this, that, Joe, the reason that the Smithsonian, and I wrote this in my book on True Legends, listen, unless you understand who set up the Smithsonian, James Smithson, who was the head of it, John Wesley Powell. John Wesley Powell even is in his own records talked about giant mummies and everything else, and the idea simply that everyone's got to get across and get through is that the history you've been taught is a total bloody, repulsive lie. And I will say this, Derek, I believe that the forbidden fruit is now and will yield its ultimate harvest and the damnation of billions. The scripture, now, that's a powerful statement. I just got that at the moment. But the forbidden fruit, the same stuff that was offered to Adam and Eve, look at how many people have suffered under original sin, and look at the price the human race has paid. But more importantly, look at the price that God's Son, Jesus Christ, has paid to redeem us. And if you understand what it truly meant, if I understand, I get bits and pieces like most people do, what a wonderful, loving, glorious God that obviously, was wanting his family back, because God used to walk with Adam in the cool of the day. Hey, any of us would take that deal in a heartbeat. But the point being is that the forbidden fruit is now yielding its ultimate harvest and damnation. Now, what is the quintessential goal of Google? What's the quintessential goal of total spy
apparatus over the entire world. Doug, what's the final, at the end of the day, no matter what the technology, what is the word that is used to basically define it all?
To define specifically what, Steve? I'm not sure.
The surveillance net? I'm sorry. Surveillance?
Well, the eye in the sky, but I'm...
Well, I'll make it easy. I'm sorry. Pay attention, grasshopper. Today, I say to you, you have two teachers. Both are trying to give left brain and right brain information that you need. So pay attention, grasshopper. I'm just kidding. So anyway, the thing is that we're at this junction where the ultimate control is information. It's if you will, it's the devil's promise in the form of a lie being bought by the technocrats who are trying to live forever apart from God, claiming we will not have this man Jesus rule over us, and all of the things that Derek and myself and Dr. Lake and L.A. Marzulli and all of us, Timothy Alberino, Anselm P. Rambla, all of us who are going to be at Branson, you're going to see a central theme and a central chord. And guess what the good news is, everybody? This is what all you that go, I don't know why they talk about this stuff. This has nothing to do with salvation. It has everything to do with salvation. If you're believing a lie and you're living in the lack of knowledge, God's declaration of the will is his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Remember this, the occultists, they smile, they smirk, they mock, they scorn, they scoff, and they know this stuff is true. It's just the Christians that should walk in the light as he is in the light and have fellowship with one another in the light do not want to deal with reality, because with reality brings responsibility. With responsibility brings ultimate accountability before the living God. So what we're doing, what Derek and I and others are doing, is trying to show you the tapestry. We're trying to put the thread that God has given us individually, and now he's bringing it together collectively. And Derek, I'm going to turn it right back to you. I'm kind of interested in to see how God weaves this all together, because I think the tapestry that God is the tapestry of redemption, and it's going to set people free. It's going to empower people, because the days that we're coming into, it's impossible for the mind of humans to embrace it. But God's given us a little bit at a time, and revealing much more than much more than he ever has in history. And that's what, Derek, you and I and all the men that are going to be there get to be, I guess you'd say, fingerprints in the creative and the redemptive purpose of Jesus Christ.
You know that Tom Horn and I and others have been warning about, and this is critical, Doug, is that Christians are embracing transhumanism. For a Christian to say that they're embracing transhumanism is like saying, God, you didn't do it right, or God just kind of wound it up, stepped out, as Francis Schaeffer wrote, stepped out of the universe, and the clock just runs on its own. And to those who think you're God, I'll invite you any place. I want to see any of you create with your words, let there be light. Now, obviously, if somebody's monitoring it with a microphone and they get a plasma burst from a space-based weapons platform, that could be possible. But, it's fascinating to me that everything that's going on, and Derek, I want to deal, too, with, what is it, Westworld, the idea. What's the name of the new series? Is it Westworld?
Westworld, yeah, the one with Ed Harris and
Yeah. I think, and that's
Anthony
off
Hopkins.
of the old. I remember the Yul Brynner one. But what's interesting to me, if you get to the heart of that, and I don't recommend anybody watch it, okay? And there are times I walk out of the room, and I really do. The idea is, isn't it interesting how the robots have to appeal to the most base human, rebellious, sinful attitudes, whether it's lust, whether it's orgies, whether it's murder? You don't see those robots out preaching the gospel and other robots being converted. Now, I know I'm taking a little too far on that, but the point is, and I don't know, Derek, did you hear the night? Probably not. I was on, I think, Doug, I was on with you, what was it, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago,
and the word sex came in, and the Lord, I saw the S, and extinction of the human race, okay? In other words, Satan's extinction, sex, of the human race. And in essence, that's the bottom line. Jesus said, okay, for all you guys that can't embrace anything beyond, well, you guys don't talk about salvation and God's four spiritual laws. We're taking you into the heart of God that designed everything, and showing you how the mind of Satan is at war in opposition, because enmity, God said he's going to put, we're going to be at war with the seed of the serpent. We're going to be at war. And you can't lay down and say, I'll be nice to you, Satan, if you'll be nice to me. It doesn't work that way. Yet, intellectually, I would say this, and Derek, I don't know what you'd say, but I would say the majority, and I won't tell you the numbers in my estimation, but the majority of that which calls itself or claimants to the Christian faith, and you just gave the statistics of, what was it, only 17%? Right, and many will come to me in that day saying, Lord, Lord, didn't we do this, didn't we do that? And he'll say, depart from me, ye who work iniquity or lawlessness, I never knew you. Again, Doug, I think the most profound revelation that I can give everyone that I've even gotten in the last couple of years of being on talk radio is this. It's not enough to say, you know Jesus. I hear people say, well, I know Jesus. And their smugness and their attitude tells me, no, they don't. Now, someone says, well, you can't judge. I can say this. Jesus said this. In that day, many will come and say, didn't we in your name do all the things, cast out demons, heal the sick? And he'll say, depart from me. I never knew you. The more critical answer is to get on your knees in repentance and say, Lord, know me, please. Try me. Search my heart. I come to you. Reveal yourself to me. Then when your eyes are upon him, is when obviously you can overcome sin. And this is to Randy Conway, when, probably in my opinion, Randy's going to be putting out his book on poetry. And I don't believe and look, Randy's my friend, but I won't flatter any man. But that guy has a gift, and if most people knew how to read Hebrew, so many of the Psalms and so much of the Bible rhymes, and it is a perfect meter. It is a mathematical. I don't think people know this, Derek, you do. But it is a mathematical formula that enables words to rhyme in meter, in length, and in phonetic, similarity. So it's fascinating. Randy will be, I believe, at Branson. Well, I know he will. And I said, Randy, bring your books, because in my opinion, if you want a wonderful revelation of a man who's got a heart towards God, put into the most anointed poetry I've ever seen in my life. And I've been walking with Jesus, stumbling with Jesus, and Jesus has been picking me up for 45 years, okay? But the point that I'm trying to make is this. God is now in the background of most claimants. And my definition, Derek, of a claimant is somebody that claims to be a Christian, but they don't have the slightest clue what it is to put that into practice. And I would say, someone said, judge not, lest you be judged. No, I'm allowed to see if there's any fruit. I'm allowed to see, how many people is a passion to bring others to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ in a person's life. And quite candidly, everybody might be surprised at this. People around the world that hear Hagman and Hagman, rebroadcast, iCast, wherever it goes, and Doug, you know this to be true, people can be in the most remote part of the Australian outback, the mountains of New Zealand, Siberia, Antarctica, believe it or not. There are people there that are listening to this now. All over the world. Paris, France, obviously, the British Isles, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. I got enough people with, Scandinavian names. I would say, boy, I wish your fellow countrymen would get the blood of the Vikings and stand up and fight against evil. And I don't know if you saw this, Derek, and this is really, Doug, I believe you talked about it, but the Danes that believe they're going to stop jihad by hugging a Muslim. And in Sweden, I'm sorry, this may be offensive to some people, but the Swedish women believe that the best way to protect themselves from rape is to allow themselves to be consensually raped or giving consenting sex to the the invading hordes. I make this statement. There will be coming a time before people finally get it, where they will kiss the headsman's axe, A-X-E, probably another word that rhymes with that, before it cuts their head. Can you see this, Doug? Can you see this, Derek? They will be so mind-controlled, it's no different than going out and blowing yourself up with a bomb belt or whatever, and they will literally embrace the swordsman's axe or sword or knife because they'll think they're doing it for a noble and holy cause. Just ask yourself this: why doesn't the guy cutting off the heads allow his head to be cut off? Because he knows better. Yet what I'm saying is this: the capitulation to evil is absolutely beyond any sane or even rational inquiry, and it's come down to the fact that we are literally seeing the doctrine of devils. We're seeing Skynet was a word, thank you, Kim, in the Terminator movies, and now we've got the World Wide Web, we've got the Internet, and we've got now an intranet, and very soon we'll have a body net by nanobots in our bodies. Pretty soon we'll have, if you will, a giant umbrella listening to our thoughts, trying to control our thoughts, and people say, where is God in all this? I'll tell you where he is right now. He's letting two people right now talk, Derek Gilbert, Steve Quayle, and others. I'm not just saying we're the only ones. I'm just saying right now to warn you. And God said his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Jesus commended the children of this world being wiser in their generations than children of light. And again, I'm sorry, and I guess my question is still, Lord, why are we a bunch of dumb sheep? Because the Lord said, all we like sheep have gone astray. And so the wolves come out. And right now they've got glaring neon wolf wear, they don't have their loins girt with truth. They've got their chest with an apron. They've coming out with a knife and a fork, salt and pepper in their eyes, and going, you look good to me, sheep. And listen, the idea of us being sheep, God is a shepherd. I don't mind that. But listen, unless sheep get wise and go into the mountains I'm likening to the presence of the living God. And in Montana, I'm flying around, and there's all these mountain sheep, regal rams, but they're out of the reach of the wolves. The wolves can't go that high, and they're not sure-footed enough. If your feet are shed with the preparation of the gospel, as part of the armor of God in Ephesians 6, you're going to be able to walk in high places, and you'll have hinds feet in high places. And what that literally means, and in case most of you have never seen this happen, how any mountain goat or sheep can be so sure-footed that on literally a vertical face, they can jump from one small, let's see, what's the word, protruding rock, and I'm not talking ledges, I'm talking individual stones, and not go down thousands of feet is astonishing to me. And guess what, Derek? They always know before they go the way back. They just don't go blindly into the future, but they always know the way back. And I've watched that. And so the point is that, actually I got it on, shot over camera. It's so close that basically you want to reach out and, lay down the hairs on the goat or the sheep's back that are standing up. So the point being is that it's critical that people start to pour into Jesus like they never have before in their lives. Now, look, I know, and Derek, you speak at a lot of them, and I know there are conferences all over the place, but I want you to sign up for live streaming, because at some point, when we get to a certain number on live streaming, we either got to pay as much money as we did for, let's say, 1,000, even if we go 200, 300, so over that. So, I don't know where it's going to be, but I want everybody to pray. If you can't be there, or if you miss the opportunity, look, you'll be able to live stream for, what is it, $89. You'll be able to, if you want, to get DVD presentations. People are coming from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen, all over the world. They signed up early. I'm sorry if you missed your opportunity, and God knows I can't do anything. So please, if you can say, put a good word into me, or somebody says, will you put a good word into Pastor Langford? And I talked to David Langford today and said, a lot of people, Steve, want me to put in a good word to you to get them on. I said, David, tell them we're locked out. We cannot. The mansion has the absolute seating limit. We have achieved that. And I'm believing, Derek, that everything that you are going to speak about, that Dr. Michael Lake, that all of the mainstream speakers are going to get things that they could have never gotten on the radio. Look, it's one thing to talk on the radio about astrocatastrophism. It's one thing to talk about, Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. And by the way, I want you to address something. Some of the oldest figurines in the world have cone heads. It looks like literally lizard people with cone heads,
right.
And even some of the Aztec, Mayan, and Incan, and it has nothing to do with head binding. That precedes head binding. What are you finding out on that? The typical ones. They're standing up, they're bipedal,
in fact,
and the reptilians. I guess a sentence in this is that I put up on my website a new term, and I believe this, snuff bots. And snuff bots go along with what you're saying. A snuff, basically film, or the word snuff, means to kill, to murder, or to literally engage in the act of murder and sex accordingly. Can you imagine, if you will, let me just call them a sex bot. And the sex bot is reading your mind, and I'm talking about with the technology that we've talked about, you've talked about, I've been on your show, or not your show, but, your show. Good night.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been on your show. It's time for me to repay you, and I've enjoyed it. By the way, I got a new name for you. You're going to love this, okay? I call you the Encyclopedia of Gilbertica. I mean, because I don't think anybody, you got that. Gilbert's his last name, and Britannica, Gilbertica, another attempt at humor. But I don't think I've ever been on any show where I feel so free that I can go in any direction, know that you at least can ask intelligent questions. And I just want to commend you for that, because God has used you kind of as a data repository. And so, it's cool to see, the release now of all of the, you're a very clinically processing, thinking individual. And so it's neat to see that, each part of the puzzle piece that God's giving to different people, now he's fitting together. The scripture says jointly fit together. I can tell you, I've tried to move puzzle pieces for a lot of years, and all it did was, can't resist, put me in a predicament and puzzled me, okay? Now God's moving the puzzle pieces, and he's putting it all together. So go ahead, snuff bots. And I think that what people don't understand is, just as you can have a female femme fatale, just as you can have a hitter, a shooter, an assassin, you can have, kill bots, murder bots. You can actually see Europe, by the way, Doug, and I think, Derek, you mentioned this. Europe is embracing sextitudes, okay, or robotitutes. I don't know what to call whorebots. Let's call them whorebots, okay? Another word for you, Doug. I've invented more words on your show. So they're embracing the whorebots to the point where the working women, those who are, a human being, prostitutes, and, the word whore, are complaining because their business is drying up. And meanwhile, men are lining up to visit these places. So, it is such a turn of events, but it wasn't unforeseen, Doug. Thank you. 15 years ago, I wrote Genetic Armageddon. And all the stuff that was in there, people would not receive it. It's not that they couldn't. Meanwhile, behind the back of the laboratories, people are working overtime on this. So, Derek, I want to thank you for bringing it up and continue, because this is critical. There are Christians saying that this is a good thing, not necessarily the sex bots, but that the transhumanism that will live forever. You can't call that which God has created and sent his son, who Colossians 1:16-17 said God put in actual the overseeing of creation, all things that we see, and that, Derek. I mean, that has to be said, Derek, because and whether they're Christians or not, I would say this: if you deny the basis of the tenets of faith, if you believe you're God, you have swallowed the lie of ye shall be as gods, and therefore the judgment that awaits and this is harsh, but it's true, the judgment that awaits the fallen angels, Lucifer. And by the way, you know this, not enough people know this, but Lucifer, they always argue with me, he's not Satan. Well, Lucifer was absolutely, Ezekiel 28 says, the anointed cherub. So there's a whole different level of hierarchy. And so if everybody wonders, well, why don't some of these fallen angels rebel? Because evidently against even him, the point is they've lost their ability to do so. And I'm not saying they ever would, but what I'm saying is that we do err that we do not know the power of Scripture. We do not know the God of creation, and we do not believe in God's wonderful presentation of His Son to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and what it means to be able to repent and be forgiven.